Welcome to Behind the Mask in Conversation with. Behind the Mask is a neurodivergent focused podcast that aims to offer support, knowledge, understanding, and most importantly, exposure to the neurodivergent community. If you are here, firstly, I hope you enjoy the episode. And lastly, if you are enjoying it, please like, follow, share, and subscribe because your support with this podcast can really help us push the message out. Keep being amazing all, and thank you. Yeah, very quick. This is episode 7 of Behind the Mask. So this is a neurodivergent podcast by neurodivergent people for neurodivergent people. And the focus of the podcast is to raise knowledge, understanding, and awareness of anything that can support neurodivergent people. So I'm joined today by Lucinda, who is known on TikTok and socials as NatureDoc. And yeah, I think actually, if we hand over to yourself to let us know about you, Lucinda, and tell us about what brings you to be working in the neurodivergent space with the work that you do.
Yeah, so I first came across ADHD on the first date with my husband. I did know him quite well beforehand, but it was our first date and he'd just been diagnosed with ADHD, which I hadn't heard of before. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating. And then we got married and we had a baby and my life went completely scatty. I mean, I just couldn't, before, I think prior to getting married, I think I was masking a lot of my ADHD, but I basically wasn't, there were things like, I never paid bills and I was a bit sort of, always late for things and so forth. And I was seen as quite scatty, but this was to a different level when you suddenly have to have the responsibilities of a child as well. And so he said, I think you need to go along and get a diagnosis too. So I got diagnosed at 31, which is 23 years ago. And it was fascinating. I thought it was just, I found the whole kind of, I spent 3 or 4 hours with the psychiatrists and, it was just interesting to learn how my brain worked. I chose not to go down the medication route because I did want another baby. And at that point, yes, social media didn't exist and, there was the internet, but there wasn't much information about the medication and pregnancy and breastfeeding and so forth. And so because I was a naturopath already, I kind of looked at what can I do to stabilise my brain? What can I do to get myself into a better place? And that began with things like blood sugar balancing, so eating a lot more protein, trying to reduce the alcohol, which obviously I was having babies anyway, so that was something I was doing anyway. And then I looked at things like adrenal health, I looked at thyroid health, and all of these things helped my brain to come together quite a lot. And I got fascinated by it also because knowing it was very genetic, I was thinking at least one of our children will have this to some degree. And in the wider family, there's a lot of dyslexia, there's a bit of autism, there's sensory processing. So, I knew there would be some sort of neurodivergence in the family. And so I just became quite sort of fascinated in the whole thing, as I said. And it turns out that 2 of our kids have got ADHD, one's got dyspraxia as well. They're fantastic kids, and they're actually 2 of them are grown up now. So one's just, the youngest one is 16. So I've got 3 kids, and we've had a hilarious journey with it all. And I can't say we have perfect lives at all, but I think ADHD is such a fascinating brain to have. I think a lot of people do have ADHD that are undiagnosed. I think once you get it, I think ADHD in its purest form is definitely a superpower, but the trouble is what we've all discovered, and I think this is why people are seeking help with it, is that times of your life, well, as a woman, whether it's time of your month or whether it's perimenopause or pregnancy or whatever, that can sort of derail things. But equally, when you're under a lot of pressure, that thing can derail things. And also when you're nutrient deficient or you've got too much adrenaline buzzing around your body or you're struggling to make enough dopamine, even the best medications in the world don't do everything. So I've been researching how to feed the brain for 23 years now. And I've written 3 books. The third one is specifically on neurodivergence, which is coming out at the end of August, and it's called Brain Brilliance. And this is bringing together a load of research and my clinical findings over the last 20 odd years, in terms of how to nourish the brain so that we can all be the best versions of ourselves.
And I think what's fantastic there is you've taken it upon yourself to make a change for yourself, but also for your family. And I know from people that are following on here and people that I'm connected with, everything that they're doing is very much to try and better the opportunity and the way in which their children kind of live life and things like that. And I know a big thing for you in relation to children, and there's many parents watching at the moment, is the benefit around food going in and the diet. And I mean, there was the big storm recently around how Joe Wicks phrased his narrative regarding diet and ADHD. And I think on reflection, I think what he meant was diet can exacerbate symptoms of ADHD, and the way in which he phrased it was ultimately it causes. And as you rightfully mentioned, it's passed down, it's genetics, and things like that. But when it comes to children and young people, then, so from a diet perspective, what are the main things potentially that in a neurodivergent child that are lacking, and some of the things that quite often aren't covered in diet that can help children and young people with their symptoms and their focus?
I'm going to answer that in a minute. What I just would love to share is just a story from this week, because I just want to give an example of the work that we do. So it's not just me. I'm actually a team of 24 now. So NatureDoc is 24 practitioners dotted around the country. We've actually got one in Ireland and one in Australia now. So we are a little bit global now, which is quite exciting. And most of us specialise in neurodivergence. So a lot will do adult neurodivergence, and most of us will do children's neurodivergence. So that's just to sort of to put you in the picture. So we look at these kids to see what might be exacerbating, what might be taking that pure ADHD or pure autism or pure dyslexia onto a different level, which is causing a lot of havoc with their lives. So this boy, I'll call him Geordie, 12-year-old lad, just such an amazing little guy, but he's been excluded from about 6 schools, and we're talking seriously disruptive and violent behaviours. So I met his parents and him 2 weeks ago, and at that point they were at breaking point, and he was 12 years old, going out every evening, throwing stones and rocks at cars, jumping on roofs, throwing tiles off roofs. And basically they had to give him a second dose of methylphenidate in the afternoon just to get him in some sort of space that he wasn't going to cause some significant harm to someone. And we have decided to do some really big tests. There's autoimmunity in the family, things like that. So we're looking at lots of things to see what might be making that brain go quite so out of control. They have tried everything. They have tried every school. You know, they basically been told a school that has a 10-meter high wall that he can't escape from. So I said to them, we need to change his diet, and I'm going to suggest 2 supplements just until we know a little bit more. And so his diet at that point was everything was highly processed. There's celiac disease, nut allergy in the family, so there were lots of quite processed gluten-free foods around. And he'd also bunk off to the local petrol station and just, you know, fill his boots with whatever he could get his hands on. So Mum has been incredible, and she's been making like hot chocolates with collagen in them and protein powders. She's been like making custard. She's been making homemade fish fingers and chips. You know, she's been doing all the stuff that he will eat. We had to go. She even did my red lentil pizza, which is a red lentil base, a few days ago, and he was eating it. It's like he said he would only ever have like a few chips if he was lucky at a meal, and suddenly he was having the whole meal. Anyway, and I got him on a supplement called magnesium, and magnesium is incredibly calming. and it helps with sleep. And then there was another one called theanine, which is naturally in tea. And it's that stuff that basically, you know, when you've had a real shock and you feel really jittered and someone says, have a nice cup of tea, love, and afterwards you feel much calmer. And that's the theanine, not the caffeine, but the theanine in it. And that's incredibly calming. And both of these work on something called GABA. And GABA is a neurotransmitter in the brain that calms the brain down. And I kid you not, I got a message with this photo of said red lentil pizza yesterday saying his behaviours have reduced by 70% in 2 weeks. He's now not needing that second dose of methylphenidate in the evening. He is now going to sleep by 10 o'clock. He's waking up at 7:30 in the morning. Yeah, he's being a little bit disruptive, but the neighbours are safe, basically. And, you know, this is only 2 weeks in. We've got a long way to go. And so I'm saying, you know, we have no idea where we'll get with him. But all I'm trying to do is to get him to a safe place and the family into a safe place so they're out of crisis. So anyway, that's the sort of thing that we do.
I love that, and I love your phrasing there as well, getting them to a safe space, because that we know there's no cure, but actually anything that can support and level and create that safe space you speak of, it is best, especially for children and young people. So I love that story. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Yeah, we just want them to be able to access some education, and, you know, just everyone to feel like they're in family harmony, you know, and it's not you know, it's not like they're thinking about, you know, what's going to happen next every 2 seconds. So really exciting. So anyway, that's just an example. So to go back to your question about where to start, it's incredibly hard because most neurodivergent people, they fall into two camps. They're either super foodies like our family, or they can be super highly selective. And very often these, you know, adults and kids can be, you know, find it really hard, have a very difficult relationship with food. So it can be the medication can really disorder their eating, you know, because of course you're not very hungry during the day and then you can binge eat in the evening. Or it can be just that, you know, you don't enjoy food that much, or you need that sensory feedback from food. So you need the crunchy food rather than the sloppy food that might feel really strange in the mouth. So there's a whole sensory picture there too, which is really important to think about. But essentially what we're trying to do, and this is where I hope my recipes help a lot, is to try and reintroduce as much protein as possible. Because protein is the building blocks for all our neurotransmitters. So our dopamine, our adrenaline, our serotonin, our acetylcholine, GABA, all these things, you need these building blocks, amino acids, which come from protein. And protein, as everyone knows, are things like chicken, beef, eggs, dairy products, but beans and pulses, tofu, you know, there's nuts and seeds, there's a whole load of sources, but they're not generally the foods that neurodivergent people are that drawn to. They're often drawn to the ultra processed foods and so forth. So yes, it's trying to get into that mindset. Now, if you are reasonably, you know, an eater that, you know, is relatively adaptable, then you can think, okay, what am I going to do for breakfast? Instead of having that big bowl of cereal, I'm going to have some eggs. I'm going to maybe have some feta cheese with that, or eggs and you know, like an omelette, cheesy omelette or something like that. It could be, I don't even mind if people start with bacon and sausages. Just having high protein is really important at the beginning of the day. And people going towards a really savoury breakfast is even better. And that can really help, not only whether you're medicated or not. So if you're not medicated, it'll just purely help with your blood sugars over the day. So you'll be set up so your blood sugars don't go really high and then really low, which can affect your focus, concentration, energy levels, all sorts of things. But if you're medicated, obviously you need that nutrition so that you don't end up just living off, you know, donuts at 4 o'clock in the afternoon once your medication starts, you know, going down, because you're feeling so empty. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think we've all experienced that. I think anyone with ADHD, you know, has an interesting eating pattern. And we see kids who, you know, parents are locking the fridge in the middle of the night because they're coming down to binge eat. And I said, no, it's because they haven't eaten enough food during the day. And of course they're blooming starving. And it's just what a kid would do. It's like if they wake up starving at 2 o'clock in the morning, they're going to go and eat. But of course, the parents think it's a bad behaviour. And I go, no, it's not. What we need to do is to give them a much bigger breakfast. Like this is up, even I don't care, even if you have to get up super early and you give them spaghetti bolognese for breakfast, I don't care what you give them. Just give them something really substantial. And then very often they need like a full meal when they get back from school at like 4:30, and then maybe another full meal at 7 or 7:30, because they're not having lunch. And these are growing kids. So with adults, you know, you can manage a little bit better, but for kids, they just can't. And especially if the lunch is disgusting at school, or they're rushed at school because they've got extra, there's always extra learning over lunchtime, isn't there? I mean, you know, so they don't have enough time. So there's a whole load of factors that it's really important, but protein is key. The other one, which is super duper important, is iron. Iron is a really important mineral. We all know about anemia. We all know it's really bad to be anemic. We all know it's bad to be low in iron, but we don't know why. And basically, iron converts tyrosine, which is the key amino acid that makes dopamine, into dopamine. So without enough iron, basically that dopamine doesn't convert, and then it finds it really hard to be used and synthesized. So there's a whole load of people going around who don't have enough iron in their system. And this is no blame or shame or anything, but, you know, a lot of people are plant-based these days, which is great, it's saving the planet, but it's not necessarily bringing in enough iron unless they really concentrate on it. And you need a heck of a lot of black beans, a heck of a lot of tofu, a heck of a lot of kidney beans to be able to get enough iron in.
So what type of foods would be iron rich then? What would you recommend?
Well, the best one of the world is actually liver, which a lot of people don't like or think is a bit ick. But actually, some people then go, oh, well, what about chicken liver pate I had when I was a child? That's all right. So liver is the best, and then red meat is very, very good too. Eggs, fantastic. That's why I love to have lots of eggs at breakfast. But what's interesting is there's not a massive difference in the plant-based and the meat-based iron. However, the difference is that the plant-based is not absorbed quite so easily. So you lose a bit, so you don't quite get as much in. But, you know, you still don't get that much. And women, especially if they're menstruating, will be losing a lot of blood each month. And so they need a lot more than men. So men can probably get away with 10, 11 milligrams of iron a day, which is sort of 2 portions of iron a day somehow. So I said it could be meat in the morning, it could be, you know, black bean burgers in the evening, whatever it might be. But women, so if you're a teenage woman needs about 14, 15 milligrams, and then an adult woman who's menstruating needs about 18. Now, if you've got heavy bleeding, you might even need more than that. And so it's a lot, and this is where supplements can be very helpful. And I know some people are saying, like, why should we need supplements? But actually, if you can't get enough iron in, and actually personally getting my iron levels up was the thing that changed my brain for the positive. It has made such a difference. So that's something I focused in on quite a lot. Now, obviously, everyone's different. And I think it's important at some point to have a blood test done with your GP and just look to see what the levels are. And what's really interesting is the normal reference range for iron in an adult is 12 to 400. And if you are below 12, then you're anemic. If you're a woman and you're below 30, then that's not so good. But for ADHD, you need it around 70, which is not even a quarter of the total level you should have. But basically 70 to 100 is really good if you want your brain to be optimized. And most people we see in our clinic and like 15, 18, 22, 23. So it's my top tip. Basically, iron is the most abundant mineral in your central nervous system. And ADHD is seen as a neurological issue. And so therefore, you want to support your nervous system by having enough iron. So that's the first thing to think about.
And with that then, so a couple of people have been asking in relation to like children and things like that. Obviously, getting nutrition from food is always going to be the most beneficial first point. But if they have children who are struggling with eating or struggling to introduce new foods at a rate in which could create impact quickly, is there a advised amount that it would be okay to have through supplements? Is it best to kind of compensate with supplements as you raise food and then lower the supplement down? Like what would be the best advice for parents trying to implement these things?
I think most kids are drawn to carbs, aren't they? You know, so they're not getting that much iron. And if they are, maybe it's a chicken nugget, which again is white meat rather than, you know, red meat or dark meat. So yes, most kids, I would say, especially if they're very pale, you know, that really sort of sheet white skin, then they might be low in iron. Another way to look, and I'm just going to show you guys, is you pull down your eyelid and you have a look there. And if it's meant to be a lovely raspberry pink in there, and if it's sort of pale white, then or pale pink, then you might need a boost up. And that's the way a doctor would look too before the blood test. So ideally you'd have a blood test, but I know that some kids are really fearful of needles, and so it's not possible. So basically, if you stick to the RDA, which is the, you know, basically, as I said, it's about 10 milligrams for a child. It goes up to about 11, 12 for a man, and then 14 for a teenage girl and 18 for an adult woman. You know, if you stick to that, and then you eat a bit in your diet, you'll probably just be giving yourself just that little top up more. The maximum we as naturopaths, nutritional therapists can give is about 40 to 45, but a doctor will prescribe up to 200, sometimes 200 twice a day. So you can see the levels that you can take are really, really quite high. But you know, obviously, if you don't know that you're low, then stick to this thing called the RDA, which is the numbers I've just given.
And with vitamin intake and things like that, I know with some vitamins, ultimately, if you have more than your body needs, ultimately your body will naturally pass it with no harm. Are there any risks at all with like things like iron and things like vitamin C or B and D? Your body will only take what it needs, then quite often pass, I believe.
So iron will store, but it's very slow to store. So it takes a long time to build up in the system. There are specific genetics which most people would be aware of already or likely to know about. Things like hemochromatosis, which is where the body has too much iron. So yes, there is occasionally, but it's a very small proportion. And if you are, then obviously seek advice from your doctor, and you may have blood work already so you can work out what you need and what you don't need. But most people would find that they're low in iron. And as I said, women, when they're pregnant, etc., will always be checked for iron. But it's the one thing that they'll look at when you go for, and you know, if you're like super ill and you're going to the doctor, they will check that sort of thing. So it will be somewhere on your medical record, and you can get a general idea of whether it's high or medium or low.
And with that, I've got some people who are medicated and they notice a significant difference in how they are around their time of their menstrual cycle in the lead up to, during, and after. And they notice a difference in the impact of the medication, and also their general well-being seems to be kind of off the scale compared to where maybe their peers might be feeling at that time. And there's a real discrepancy. And I know there's inconsistency amongst women and everyone's individual. But is there any reasons for that, like with the medication, and are there any things that women can be mindful of to support that process with their diet and supplements?
Yes. So basically, with women, whenever their estrogen dips, they will probably run into trouble with their ADHD, because basically estrogen, we have estrogen receptors along everywhere in our bodies, in our brains, along our guts, in our, you know, in our female organs, you know, basically estrogen is everywhere. Men have estrogen too, okay, but basically this affects women more. So when you go through ovulation, your estrogen plummets, and it basically evens out a little bit just before your period. But in basically during that period, that 2 weeks up until your period, your estrogen will be lower than it normally is. And basically, estrogen helps you to basically synthesize dopamine and reuptake it into the body. What does the medication do? The medication is all about reuptaking dopamine into the body. Okay. So basically it's doing a really bad job at doing that because the estrogen is not there to help you. The same happens when women start to go through perimenopause, when things start fluctuating, that estrogen progesterone starts fluctuating, and it can be worse around the menopause when you actually stop menstruating. It's because that's when you flatline and you stop making estrogen. So again, women struggle then too. So basically, though, this is why women often find it very hard to stabilize their ADHD. And I mean, every woman has, a ebb and flow during their menstrual cycle. We're hungry at different times, our guts work at different times. And again, because everything's varying all the time. So obviously, you can't really boost up estrogen. Obviously, maybe a medical intervention might help, but there are some really, really good supplements that have been found to specifically help PMDD, and which is this sort of really bad, extreme PMS, PMT.
There's been a needed light shone on that recently. I think like some celebrities are coming out talking about it, and thankfully people are starting to understand the severity of PMDD and actually the impact it has on women.
It's enormous. I mean, many women, when, you used to say, oh, I have a really bad ADHD, times that by 10, it's just, they can be bedridden, they can be suicidal, it can be really extreme, and it's just impacts everything, and it makes them feel even more unreliable than they have been, So I'm just going to talk about one thing, and I'm not saying this is the only thing, but it's just because it really ties in with ADHD. So there's a lovely spice that we put in paella and we put in curries, and it's called saffron, and it mainly comes from Spain, Middle East. Saffron's that lovely orange spice. Okay, it's a little sort of filament. And saffron has been researched for ADHD. And these have been children's studies rather than women's studies, but they have been found to work as well as methylphenidate without the side effects. Now, I'm not saying that's for everybody, and I'm not telling anyone to switch from their medication to this at all. But what I'm saying is that it's interesting. These were not enormous studies, but they were interesting studies. And the reason why is because it helps to bring down that high adrenaline state, but it also helps to stabilize hormones. Now, equally, saffron is used in these countries, especially in India, for women who are having real problems with PMS and also difficulties with their actual period. It's also used for hysteria. It's used for that kind of thing. So if you think about it, these spices have been around for millennia. They've been used for lots of different places for different reasons. The word ADHD didn't exist then, but they were still being used for women who couldn't, having real challenges. And so anyway, here's some evidence that saffron also helps with PMDD. So basically, when you piece that all together and you're saying, okay, it helps with PMDD, it helps with ADHD, so let's try it. So we've tried it with several women in our clinic. Now, as I said, we mainly see children. I mean, we've seen about 8,000 or 9,000 people overall in our clinic, and I would say maybe not that many women with ADHD, but a lot of perimenopausal women, a lot of women having real problems with them, and they found saffron has changed them so quickly, and they found it really, really comforting. It's non-addictive. They don't need it forever. Often it can help to regulate them within 4 to 6 months. Sometimes they just just call on it when they need it. So they sometimes don't even take it all month. They might just take it once they've ovulated. And that's just one thing to think about. I'm not saying it's everything. It's certainly not the one. There are so many other things to think about. There's magnesium and so forth as well.
And that is one that I will always honestly say, for me, whenever I get into the habit and routine of taking saffron, I feel the benefits. I went through that stage of thinking, oh, is my mind making this? But the more I read about it and the more I experienced from saffron, I do think there's wonders within it that and I've experienced them myself. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that. So that there are a lot of gummies and all these things going around online. Obviously everyone's different. Is there a better way to access saffron? Because you might see these saffron gummies online, but surely a raw kind of based saffron would be more beneficial? Would you say so yourself from experience?
So saffron is quite expensive, but most people will buy it to make one paella, and it'll be sitting in their kitchen cupboard for years and not being used. So either just enjoy paella, enjoy a curry with some saffron in it, or what you can do is you can put a couple of filaments into some warm water with a bit of honey, maybe add some turmeric or something like that. You can make it quite nice, a little kind of almost like a latte. You could get some nice warm milk, and that would be really comforting. As I said, in India they usually add something called jaggery, which is a type of sugar, that doesn't cause too many sugar spikes. So, and it's really, really comforting. So you can do that, but I would say most people, because we're lazy and disorganized and forget things, and things end up in cupboards and get hidden, is that people end up they take a supplement because they find it more reliable. They find it somewhere, it can be by their bed, so when they wake up in the morning and they're feeling just out of sync, they can take it, or they can have it by their toothbrush, or wherever, whatever works for them. So I would say that supplements are usually what people end up with. They can trial having it through food, but often, and also sort of that reliable dose, I guess. So yes, I've not tried a gummy. I've only ever tried the capsules. We do have an online shop called NatureDoc Shop, so we do stock supplements, and I look for the most potent, the best quality, rather than necessarily the easiest. So the brand that we stock is called the Naked Pharmacy, and I like them because they use basically very, very therapeutic and very sort of potent. So they're not necessarily the cheapest, but they are very, very good quality. So that's the brand that we use.
Form available.
Sorry?
Like the rawest form available, and
yeah. Absolutely. It's just, they're pharmacists, and so therefore they have sourced this really, and they've done research, and you know what I mean? I just feel very comfortable with them. So, but obviously everyone seek out their own one and see if it helps or not. The supplement business is enormous, and it's very hard to know how potent something is, or how much, because saffron's terribly expensive. I would say if it's super cheap, it may not have very much in it.
A question that was asked on a few occasions relating to diet and things like that. There was a few creators whose children had been diagnosed with Arfid around food, and it was causing them, understandably, a lot of worry, a lot of concerns. They want the best for the children, but then there's fear around them not eating, and the general consensus was for them just worry about how they can best support their child to get what they need when their diet is extremely limited, and it comes from a place of fear of food in a lot of cases rather than choice. Are there any strategies or techniques or things that parents can use to help their children to get these intakes of the key things that you mentioned, if they are very resistant and fearful in some cases of food?
So first of all, it is a journey. And every child is different in terms of what they will and won't eat. Obviously, there's often common foods that they're drawn to. So it's often, the pizza, the nugget, the very simple, crunchy beige foods. It is important. The reality is it is important to support their nutrition somehow. And what's strange is very often, even if they won't actually put new foods in their mouth because it's too fearful, sometimes they're quite bright, these kids, that they usually realize they do need the nutrition, so they might take a supplement instead. So sometimes you can have that conversation and they go, yeah, I can do that because it's a pill or it's some drops or whatever, but they won't actually start a new food. So it's important to think about their nutrition overall, and not just, I think, rather than wait, because it could take years to build in new foods because they're so fearful. And so therefore, I think it's, as I said, this is where supplements can be helpful if they're willing, or if you feel it is possible to get them in. But I just want to share, this is a slightly different perspective from a lot of people. So with most approaches with Arfid, it's like okay, let's put in some therapies, bring down the fear, put them in a better place so that they're more likely, make it more friendly, more easy, build in things very slowly over time. And that is fantastic. And of course, you've got to do that. But there are sometimes shortcuts. And I just want to explain where I'm coming from. Is that very, very often neurodivergent people are born, and this is no blame at all, it's due to genetics, environment, all sorts of things, but they're born with a low zinc status. So this has been found in dyslexia, ADHD, autism. And zinc is the second most abundant mineral in your central nervous system, okay? So it's not quite as important as iron, but it's jolly nearly there. And basically zinc helps with digestion. So very early on, the kids often have a milk allergy, or they have a lot of colic, they have a lot of distress, okay? And therefore, their tummy always feels uncomfortable. So they associate eating with not feeling great, okay? So the whole it starts off like that. Also, zinc is really important for the immune system. Okay, so again, they might get more colds, coughs, tummy upsets, ear infections, tonsillitis, etc. So again, those sorts of things make it difficult to eat. It's quite off-putting. Okay, so you can just see this relationship with food is not starting off on the great footing. Also, zinc helps to make a sense of smell and taste. So it creates, when we've had COVID and we can't smell anything. So imagine, and that's often because zinc's used up to get rid of a virus. So that's what the body sort of prioritizes to fight the virus, the zinc. So that's why it takes away from the nose. So imagine if the child's always been sick, got this sort, the tummy's not been quite right, and they're born with, they haven't got enough zinc in their system anyway. That's going to turn into a bigger problem. Now, there is very little evidence about this other than our experience, and as I said, we've been working with kids for 23 years now, is that zinc, as I said, is really important for the nervous system, the neurological system. And my take on this is that zinc also is really important for sense of texture, which is such an important thing. Now imagine if you can't smell or taste anything particularly well, what do you need? You need some sort of feedback in your mouth to make it feel a nice experience. Otherwise, you can't be bothered, right? So I think that once you get the smell and taste right, then the texture is less of a priority for the neurological system. But I also think that there must be something like that feeling, that sense, whatever it might be, that dysregulation seems to change when you get enough zinc in the system. Now, luckily, most zinc supplements, if you're clever, do not taste. I wouldn't put it in water because it's slightly metallic. I mean, just slightly metallic, but it's not really. But I would put it in apple juice, orange juice. Often they will have those. You can even put it in a pancake mix, a waffle mix. You can put it in a yogurt. It goes in most foods and hides quite nicely. And you can start literally one drop at a time, and build up. And if you do that for 2 months, 3 months, you're not going to see a win straight away, but very gradually, everything seems to be less repulsive to them. Everything seems to be less fearful. And I think it's because the zinc helps to stabilize the neurological system. So a very classic child that's low in zinc not only has all that profile I was talking about, but also tends to have very high mood swings. You tend to have to walk around them as if on eggshells. They find it really difficult to regulate anyway. So they're in a high fight or flight state. So zinc helps to bring down that high adrenaline state, that high stress state. So we find that very, very slowly, and it's almost a surprise. It's almost like by mistake, you're out and they eat something that you weren't expecting them. Or, that you turn your back and they're eating something that is on the table that or they sniff something or they touch it. I mean, it could be something as simple as putting it to their mouth, but not actually putting it in their mouth. But slowly that can change. So zinc can be a game changer over time. Again, stick to the RDA unless you know that your child is low or you're under, say, one of my practitioners. The other thing is the gut microbiome. So we've all heard of this ecosystem of bacteria in our guts that feed our brains. So our gut is known as our second brain because our neurotransmitters like serotonin serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, GABA, all these neurotransmitters you probably read about if you have ADHD, are all made in the gut, and they're made by gut bacteria that's made from food. Now, if you're having a very bland, simple diet, then you're not going to be able to make those neurotransmitters as easily switched off, like pleasure and so forth, and the dopamine. So adding in things like, because if they won't eat a new food, you're not going to get the lovely kefirs and yogurts and sauerkrauts in. I mean, not many kids will eat sauerkraut anyway, but you know what I mean? It's just basically, it's pretty impossible. But again, probiotics tend to be fairly tasteless, quite easy to get in somehow into the food. It can't be heated, but it could go in a little spoonful of yogurt. Sometimes they'll take medicine, for instance, they'll take Calpol. So what you do is you get Ribena or something like that, like a Calpol-ish tasting something, and you put the probiotic in there, so they think they're having Calpol. So there's a whole load of things that you can do to get those probiotics in. And again, those slowly help to rebuild those neurotransmitters in the gut. And therefore, there's more better signals going to the brain. So these are the sorts of things that you can do. And as I said, this might sound very different from anyone else's approach, but it's just stuff that I came across having worked with these kids, talking to the parents. I've learned more from the parents than any textbook, any scientific paper. And it's really interesting. So one of the things that kids do, and adults too, if they're very low in zinc and also iron, those are, as I said, my two pet favourite subjects, zinc and iron, there's often something called picker. Picker is where they start putting non-food items in their mouth. So it could be paper, it could be tissues, it could be soil, it could be stones. Pregnant women, when they're craving coal or they're craving really icy drinks or whatever, this is called picker. And very often it's because of low iron and zinc. Anyway, I learnt this through my children, my lovely neurodivergent children, because I don't know if you've ever had this with your kids, but they're watching telly and they couldn't stop chewing on their t-shirts and their hoodie strings and their sleeves, and they get holes in them. It will be just disgustingly wet and gross. It's like, what the heck are they doing? Are they bored? What is this? Are they, they're just copying each other. Anyway, I started, because I'm always asking why. Why do kids do this? Why do we do this?
That's why anyway. We're ADHDers. Like, we need to know why.
Why? So of course I did my research and I thought, that's odd. This sounds like this thing called picker. But that's meant to be really extreme iron deficiency, really extreme zinc deficiency. But I thought, you know what? Because I'm me, I'm going to give them a little bit of iron and a little bit of zinc over the, and see what happens. And I kid you not, within 3 or 4 days, t-shirts were nice and dry, no chewing on anything. I thought, that's so weird. And, then it would happen again a few months later. I thought, okay, let's do a bit more zinc and iron, and it would stop again. I thought, okay. And then talking to parents, they said, yeah. When you get the iron and the zinc up, they stop putting these non-food items in their mouth. And you can see these very sensory kids are always putting, fiddle toys and things in their mouths and pens in their mouths. And then, and you sort of think that that's a part of the ADHD. But it might be that they're showing you that they need a bit of these things. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it is always that, because of course there are sensory issues, but it's something to explore. It's something to think about.
Okay, so we're heading towards 9 now.
Yep.
So some key things then, if we are to surmise, so top 3 supplements and things to be mindful of. You would mention zinc, iron, and proteins. Proteins first to enable your body to use the zinc and the iron appropriately. Would that be correct?
Yeah. Yes. Basically, the protein is these amino acids that are the building blocks of neurotransmitters, And then the things like the iron and the zinc help to convert and reuptake those neurotransmitters. So they help to stabilize them basically and help them to work a bit better. And these can be taken alongside medication too. So the only thing you have to avoid, and it's only an hour before and an hour after, but you have to avoid vitamin C with methylphenidate because it can dilute it and flush it out too fast. So you don't want to drink a glass of orange juice with your methylphenidate, basically. But other than that, other supplements can go alongside it beautifully. There's no contraindications whatsoever other than vitamin C.
Yeah, and that's, as they say, not to say if you are going to have vitamin C at the end of the day, if you're taking the start of the day medication.
You can have your smoothies, your orange juice, your vitamin C if you've got a cold, whatever it might be. But have it, maybe after lunch or, tea time onwards, and it's absolutely fine.
And then going back to just bringing together medicated women or menstruating women in their cycle, or menopausal, perimenopausal women, key things for them. So maybe diet and supplements that could help them.
Yeah, so the saffron, as I said, would be a really good first step. I think magnesium, which is a very calming mineral, can be very, very helpful. And again, lots of protein, and just be kind to yourself. Just say, okay, I'm going to have a quiet day, or I'm going to put myself to bed early, or whatever it might be, whatever feels right for you, and not to beat yourself up, and to seek out help. If that's not enough, seek out more help, because there's so much you can do. I've written a blog specifically on sort of extreme PMS, which does include all about PMDD. So you can go and find that on my NatureDoc.com website. So I write a blog. There are about 300 blogs on there now, about 250, 300 recipes as well. So there's a whole load of stuff there that you can find. So just look on the search, just put in the search ADHD or PMDD or whatever you want to do. And it's not always related to ADHD. It's often related to most women, because we see people with everything in our clinic, pretty much every kind of, challenge in life. So, yeah, they're all there if you need some extra support. And we're there, as I said, our clinicians are there if you need proper one-to-one.
Someone's asked, is there a particular form of magnesium which will support with that calming and sleeping and relaxation side of things?
So the best and most easily accessible form of magnesium that helps with the brain, and it helps with sleep, and it basically helps that sort of neurological side of things, is something called magnesium bisglycinate or biglycinate. And basically it's brilliant because it doesn't cause the loose bowel, which some do, and it's very well absorbed. So you want to look for magnesium bisglycinate, and adults would need at least 400 milligrams. When we do our testing, I would say at least 90% of people, when we do these full sort of like 360-degree tests. We do urine tests, stool tests, hair tests, genetic tests, everything. We would find that most need about 600 milligrams of magnesium. So it's quite a high amount to really and that's in adults. I'm not talking about children. Children would be much less, obviously.
Okay. Last thing before we go, is there any questions? There's been a few on there which we've answered along the way. Someone saying about the magnesium citrate with the upset stomach. I think some have learnt the hard way.
Very quickly, yeah. So that's why you want to get the bisglycinate and not the citrate. But a lot of neurodivergent people are very constipated, so sometimes they do well on both, on the citrate, purely because they're going, as well as helping them with their sort of whole sort of. So magnesium works on about 400 pathways in the body. It helps really, it's brilliant for blood sugar regulation because it helps to take carbohydrate from the bloodstream into the cell. So very often when people are craving carbs and sugar, it's because they're lacking in magnesium. And magnesium, as I said, helps to pass it into the cells. So the cells go, hooray, I'm finally fed and I don't need to crave.
And this is why it fascinates me how one thing feeds another and allows it. So you could be putting so much good in here, but if you haven't set yourself up accordingly, you're not going to feel the benefits of it. It is such a process. And no,
it's a massive puzzle. It just is. And I think that's where my team are so good, because they're able to, look and find and fill in those empty spaces that people just like, I just don't get it why my brain's, I've got the best support from the psychiatrist, I've got the best support from, I don't know, psychologist or whoever, I've got my ADHD coach, and I'm eating well. So I would say for a long time I eat so well and I exercise, but when I exercise I feel terrible. And then I discovered I had a thyroid condition, and so now I've sorted that out. I've got all my vibrancy back, so I'm in my mid-50s and I feel fantastic. I feel so much better than I have for years, just because and it took a while to work it out, but it's amazing how I think we're very, very sensitive people. And I think, so there's a really high proportion of neurodivergent people who have hypermobility. So they have, I've got my bendy thumbs, there we go. Which means that you're more prone to things like chronic pain. And so, I had a frozen shoulder for 10 years. It's gone now because I found the most brilliant mobility guy near us who's really, really helped with my posture. But these things, you've got to seek them out yourself, and it takes time when you've got ADHD because you can't do too much at once.
Last thing someone's mentioned, is there anything in particular that can support with endometriosis?
Endometriosis is a very challenging condition, and I'm sorry if you're experiencing it. It can mean severe pain and lots of heavy bleeding when menstruating, but also you can get spots in the other parts of the body which sort of gets affected too at the same time. And, it can be super tough. I would say it would need systemic support, as in looking at everything. But my tips for that would be to look at your blood sugars levels, as in get that protein in, etc. Build in those iron levels because you'll be bleeding very heavily. I think saffron can be incredibly helpful, especially in those really challenging times. Magnesium is quite relaxing when it's also painful. Things like turmeric can be brilliant. And there's something which I haven't mentioned but is so important for neurodivergent people: omega-3 fatty acids from eating oily fish. And again, lots and lots of salmon and trout and sardines and mackerel are brilliant.
I was thinking from a supplement angle as well, if they were looking for supplements, high level EPA, is that the correct one? Is it the higher level EPA or something?
So for children, you want mainly DHA because that helps with eye development and it helps with brain development. But as we get older, and if you're inflamed, so if you're in pain, so whether it's endometriosis or chronic pain from fibromyalgia or whatever, then you need more EPA. But most of these fish oils have both. It's just, you just need to look at the slight balance. But so it's better to take a fish oil than not. Obviously, if you can get the perfect one with the perfect balance, that's even better. But you do need quite a high dose. So sometimes we give like 3,000 milligrams a day just to start off with, to help bring down that inflammation. So it's all about what I see is really important before we wrap up is supplements. I see as scaffolding to help your body until you're in a better space, so you don't need it. So it's not meant, none of these things are meant to be forever things. They're meant to be there. They might seem forever. I've taken certain supplements for a couple of years, but I hardly take any supplements anymore because my body doesn't need them anymore. Exactly. So it's all about, most of these things are what I call adaptogenic. So they adapt the body to be able to be, so maybe less high adrenaline state, fight or flight state, maybe slightly better at synthesizing and reuptaking dopamine, whether it's whatever it might be, or getting rid of that horrible fatigue and brain fog, or helping you to sleep, or whatever it is. They're all there to adjust. And the problem is no one knows how long you need to be on it and that's where you've got to be your own advocate and say, this is still helping, it's not helping anymore. And so that's the difficulty. Is there are a gazillion tests you can do, and we do these brilliant baseline tests, but actually at the end of the day, how long someone needs to stay on something is very, very personal to them, depending on the stress in their lives and the other things going on. If you're like us, my husband and I run NatureDoc. We work 7 days a week, and we laughed in bed a couple of nights ago because he was reading a tweet. and it said, how do you get dopamine? And one of them was, being a workaholic, and we just laughed at each other because that's how we get our dopamine, is working really hard.
If that's what you enjoy and you're getting that back from people seeing the benefit, it is that joy and that chase, isn't it? And it's great when you marry what you love doing with work or hobbies and things, and you can get that rush from it. The last question I ask everybody, and especially people like diagnosed, looking back from the point of getting diagnosed, if you could go back and give yourself as a child a message, or advice or anything, what would it be and why?
I think so. My experience at school was, I was at a tiny school. Obviously, my primary school was tiny. So then I went to a big secondary school, and that's where my academics went from being quite like up there to down to the bottom set. So basically, I came out of school feeling like I was a failure, a dunce. I think it would be going back when I was doing that transition at 10, 11, to, if I'd known about the ADHD, if I'd had that, the armor to be able to basically deal with it, I think, I'd have had a very different experience at school. If I'd understood my brain, it would have helped me so much. So it's basically looking back to me, age 10 or 11, saying, you've got it, you can do it. You've actually, you actually can, you run a business now, looking forward, you run this great big business and you love what you do. And, you are actually, you've got a brain. It's just the brain wasn't working very well in that space at school.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for joining us. I think for anybody that has any more questions or wants to know more, there are loads of avenues what Lucinda has to do so. Do you want to share your Insta and your TikTok? I know we mentioned earlier NatureDoc, and your website information.
Yeah, so obviously TikTok, NatureDoc Health, Instagram, I'm NatureDoc Kids, but the website is really important. If you go to naturedoc.com, that's where all the blogs are. So one's asked about POTS, you can look up my blog on POTS. So I've covered most things. I've got some really interesting blogs coming up on relating things like parasites and ADHD, and I've got one on celiac disease and ADHD. So I'm trying to write lots of different blogs every week, so that everyone is got the information they need. And as I say, it's going to be in the book too. And then if you want to buy supplements, do go on to naturedoc.shop. That is it's a very large curated selection of supplements, but it's all the supplements I've been using for nearly 30 years as a naturopath. So there are lots of different brands. I'm not wedded to a single brand. It's all basically, has this worked for our clients or not? And is it possible to get into a child if it's a child? So basically that's and is it pure? Is it potent? Is it going to do the job?
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Through the sound issues and whatnot, I think a lot of people would have got a lot out of that. I think I'm going to have a hell of a lot of fun trying to download and get the audio right on this edit, but I will do my damnedest to do so. But
glitching, I don't know what it is, because it's a good phone.
It may have just been a connection at some point and it's thrown us out, but it's not. It's all good. But thank you very much. I've learned a lot. You've reinforced some thought that I had, which I didn't know was fact, and I think I've taken a lot from this, from in the comments, the interactions and people asking questions and their reactions. I think everyone's done the same. So thank you very much, Lucinda. I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, it's been lovely, Paul. And if anybody's got any questions, just send me a DM. I'm really, really happy to help, because I know that there are lots of people who may be a bit shy about asking questions on here, or we've missed their question. So, I'm a bit of a nutter. That's my ADHD, is basically, I'm there on DMs.
Brilliant. Well, take care. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.